Here we are. Good morning, everybody. How many people have hangovers? See, there's some people who are honest here. I'm Jan Reardon. I'm with the Lynd and Harry Bradley Foundation in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I am joined here by a distinguished panel of experts on political correctness across the country. All the way to my right is Alex Smith, who is the first female chairman of the National College Republicans in the history of the organization. Congratulations, that's absolutely terrific.
Thank you.
Then we are honored to be joined by Ambassador Francis Rooney, who was George W. Bush's appointment to the Embassy of the Holy See, and he is also a congressman from Florida 19.
Thank you.
Tom Borelli is a contributor to the Conservative Review, a frequent Fox News analyst, and he is also a shareholder activist, which is something I'm going to be asking him about later, and has previously been a science fellow for the U.S. House of Representatives. Tom Borelli. And immediately to my right, you notice I have nobody to my left. Immediately to my right is Scott Wolter from the Capital Research Center. He is the president and CEO. And he served in the George W. Bush administration as a policy advisor. So please give everybody a big welcome. Don't clap too loudly, though, because there are people here who have hangovers. They told me that already. So political correctness is a term that gets thrown around an awful lot. In fact, it gets used so much that I sometimes feel it's become almost meaningless. So I'm going to start out the conversation in a sort of a perhaps too obvious fashion. I'm going to ask Scott, would you please talk to us a little bit about what we mean when we say something is politically correct?
Sure. The real origin of the term goes back to the first half of the 20th century and the hard left, where they made no bones about it. There's no objective truth. All that matters is what serves the party, so truth will change day to day. This is what you see in Orwell's 1984, where things go down the memory hole. Now, then it began seeping into the broader left in this country, and it was probably around the 1980s, I think, that conservatives began to make fun of political correctness because it was already becoming so ridiculous. But I have friends who were like in graduate school at Cornell in the 80s, and at meetings there'd be, oh, well, we can't say that, it wouldn't be politically correct, and people, that's what you would hear. Now, of course, what it's become is a vicious orthodoxy that is enforced with bullying, so that whatever the political agenda of today is, if you violate it, wham.
Ambassador Rooney, what kinds of examples of political correctness are you engaging in or encountering in your work in the House of Representatives?
We have seen so many egregious instances of meaningless euphemisms and politically correct statements. Imagine this, that in recent years, the government decided that you couldn't say the word Islam and terrorist in government manuals, including the counterterrorism manual. You can't say Islamic terror in the government counterterrorism manual.
Alex, give us an example that you've encountered.
There are too many to count on college campuses today. First, I want to give a big shout out to all of my college Republicans here who traveled by bus, by car.
They're the ones with the hangovers, I'm pretty sure.
They might have hangovers. I can neither confirm nor deny.
Yeah.
But their enthusiasm and their excitement should give everyone hope here, and particularly on college campuses. I mean, look no further than Dr. Condoleezza Rice being disinvited from Rutgers to speak at the commencement as a result of the politically correct forces on campus, who then went into the administration buildings and destroyed property in order to make their point. So there are just too many to count, and what we're seeing on campus is a real lack of intellectual diversity, while the left trumpets all kinds of other diversity.
Tom, it's your turn now to tell us what exactly is an activist shareholder, and how does that fit into a discussion of political correctness?
Sure. Well, let me first define political correctness within the business community.
Sure, by all means.
And within the CEO world, there are CEOs who are progressives themselves, and they use their company to drive their progressive agenda. Starbucks CEO Schultz is a good example, Howard Schultz. The other side of the CEOs are the ones who get intimidated through shareholder activists, people who show up at the shareholder meeting and pressure them, or through boycotts or threats of boycotts and intimidation. And we've seen that with a number of companies recently with President Trump, either Nordstrom's getting rid of Ivanka Trump's products. We've seen Kellogg's back away from advertising with Breitbart.
LL Bean.
LL Bean and Under Armour. The horror, the CEO went on CNBC and he said President Trump would be a good business president. That would be an asset for the country. Immediately, there was a huge left boycott threats, and a stockholder analyst downgraded the stock because of the controversy. That is hugely important in the investment community.
So, as a shareholder activist, what do you do?
Well, shareholder activism is one way to really fight back on the left. The left has been able to push the world to political correctness because we on the right tend to be more theoretical and less active. The left for years have bought shares in publicly traded companies, went to their shareholders' meetings, and basically embarrassed them by asking them questions or doing protests really within a shareholder meeting. So from the right, you actually can buy a share and show up at their shareholder meeting and press them on why they're lobbying for big business or why they're backing away because of political correctness.
So we shouldn't be throwing away those little proxy, those
No,
proxy things that come in the mail?
No.
So, you know, it's kind of interesting. I think the underlying theme here, when we talk about political correctness, is there are two important components. One is the irony that the left talks about bullying and our need to stop bullying in the schools, but the biggest component of political correctness really is bullying, isn't it? And then the other piece of it is that there's also, this is really at heart an issue of free speech, that Americans take for granted the notion that we should be able to say anything, no matter how offensive it is, and that we have the right to say it. The notion of, I'll defend to the death your right to say what you want to say, even if I disagree with it. That notion seems to be dying. Why do you suppose that is? Scott?
Well, I think part of it is that that notion comes from America's founding. And the left is getting progressively better, you might say, at eliminating people's understanding and education in the founding. I mean, George Washington gets, a sentence or two in a textbook in school these days. So that's one big part of it, that people don't appreciate the tradition and they haven't heard the arguments for why you need to let good speech push out bad speech. I mean, sometimes people say bad things, but the answer to that is more speech.
Right.
But that's an argument, and people have to hear that argument and understand that argument.
Well, the lack of civics education, I think, certainly has to be a big part of that. It's been a while since I've been a college student, but even when I was a student, there really wasn't a lot of opportunity to study civics. Alex, what have you discovered, what have your experiences been in that regard?
Well, it's really a problem that starts in our high schools, not even just our colleges and early education. We see that more and more civics education is sort of being eroded by the left and rewritten. So I agree. I think students come to campuses with not a full understanding of our tradition of the Bill of Rights and what makes us sort of uniquely Americans. And I think that there's just this idea out there that there's a desire not to offend. And I think certainly for the millennial generation, which is very conscious of sort of each other's feelings and that of the community around them, in some ways that's not a bad thing. This tends to be a pretty philanthropic generation, one that wants to volunteer and be involved and build communities. But again, the civics education that's lacking in our schools isn't really driving home that point that free speech has a special place in American society, and particularly on a college, university, or campus. Look at the University of New Hampshire, which before there was an outcry, tried to publish a standards manual, if you will, of words that might be considered offensive. One of those words was American, that might be considered offensive. And so I think it's been taken to such an absurd level, and even students on college campuses are starting to see that, just sort of everyday non-political students.
So one of the popular conversations since November, Ambassador, that has struck me as an indicator that nobody understands how the Constitution works, has been this really, I'm sorry, the only word I can use is ignorant discussion of the Electoral College. Would you mind talking a little bit about how that's being received among your colleagues?
We should be thankful every day to our founders that we have the Electoral College. It's one of those. If not, then California and New York would run this country as a dictatorship, which is exactly what the liberal elites would like to see happen. And if I might, also, de Tocqueville, if he was a real person, and people dispute that, foresaw this. He foresaw, when he wrote about the ability of a minority to tyrannize the majority, when he said, in this kind of circumstance, that the will of man is softened and shattered, and that men are constrained from acting, and it stupefies a people, puts them into a stupor, well, they will not speak up, gets back to your relative truths thing.
Well, there really is a chilling effect. I mean, and that is really the whole point, I think, of political correctness. One of the Blind and Harry Bradley Foundation's grantees is the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education, FIRE, who defend the rights, yay, here for FIRE, who go across the country defending the individual rights of college students who, to my astonishment, apparently don't have the rights that are guaranteed them in the Constitution to say what they like. And again, in the terms of bullying, we have campus thought police who, if you say something that is considered incorrect, they send biased response teams to find you.
What?
And the biased response, and there's more than 40 colleges across the country, if I'm remembering the numbers correctly from a FIRE study, they actually include campus police. So who's doing the bullying here? I'm really astonished that more outrage among parents who are paying tuition isn't being shown, that their kids aren't being allowed basic constitutional rights. It's pretty shocking. Is there a solution for this, either a public policy solution or some other way that we can stop this from happening on college campuses?
You want to answer about college campuses?
Sure, and let me just give a big shout out to FIRE. They do incredible work. They stand up for our college Republicans when they're being bullied by college administrators and professors, and they're doing just absolutely amazing work on behalf of all free speech advocates on campus of all different viewpoints. They actually came in and did a training with our college Republicans at a recent conference that we had, and the kinds of proactive steps that they were showing our college Republicans what to do, and how universities and colleges sort of cleverly disguise these warnings not to do something. They might say, oh well, it's in it's within our interest to protect the safety of the students here. Well, the safety of the students is really a standard that's only found when we're talking about high schools, not college students. So our public universities are certainly violating First Amendment rights in so many different ways. And I think that there's a huge opportunity to do something about that when we have federal funding that's tied to these colleges and universities. And I think that there should be a real examination of just how much intellectual diversity these campuses are allowing that are being, that's being footed by the taxpayers. And I think that the House Republicans actually recently in the last Congress set up a way for you for students to report these incidents of bias on campus against conservative students or against any kind of student with a diverse viewpoint. And I think we need to be more aggressive about pointing that out and showing exactly what taxpayers are funding and threatening schools that might not be offering that kind of diversity.
You know, to pick up on a similar point, I think what we really need is leadership. Again, leadership. For a chief executive of a corporation to be silenced because he said we have a pro-business president is frightening and shocking. Not only did the CEO of Under Armour, essentially apologize, he took a full-page ad out in the Baltimore Sun, distancing himself from President Trump. But this is the fear. And what we all have to realize is the left is incredibly organized. Nothing happens by accident. So when you see Nordstrom pulling Ivanka Trump products off the shelves or off their websites, it's because there's an activist, there's a website. It's actually not a website, it's an online spreadsheet, grab your wallet. They're incredibly organized. You can go in the spreadsheet, you can find the CEO's name, you can find their email address, you can find the phone number of customer service, the activists look and they call. That's what we don't see, and really, that's what the right doesn't match. And we have to be as organized and as passionate as they are on the left.
We're seeing the exact political version of that right now with these protesters all over the place. I've got 1,000 of them in my offices in Southwest Florida today. I'm sorry I can't be down there to talk to them, but I'll fix that next week. But the fact of the matter is, they're trying to chill our free speech in the name of speech, and if we don't stand up, and it's great to see so many young people here willing to do it, then they're going to trample right over us.
Right.
Well, that's all I would add is, no right is really secure unless you're exercising it. The most fundamental thing is exercising the rights and then defending them. And if there are battles, then there are battles.
Well, and the irony is, of course, that the people who are being hurt, whose feelings are hurt by something somebody says, don't take into consideration anything about the feelings of people who might be addressed by a biased response team, including an armed police officer. But that's perhaps neither here nor there. Before we go on, I would like to point out someone here who's in the audience who is perhaps a poster child or a poster professor for the academic freedom and the free speech movement. Last night's winner of the Jean Kirkpatrick Award for Academic Freedom was presented to Professor John McAdams from Marquette University. Professor, would you just stand up and say hello? Whoa. Yay. Professor McAdams has been suspended from his teaching post at Marquette University for daring at a Catholic campus to say that a college student ought to be able to openly discuss his views, his Catholic views on gay marriage in the classroom when another member of the faculty had told him he could not. So there is a court case coming up. Marquette has stood firm that Professor McAdams has no free speech rights, even though his contract says he does. And I hope you will all appreciate how difficult it is to stand up to the kind of bullying and professional attacks that are going on, sometimes behind the scenes, all around the country. It's something you need to pay attention to. We need to rally to that cause. We need to support the people who are both in office and on campus, people like Tom who are speaking out, and Scott who are doing the research to help people to understand what's actually happening behind the scenes. As conservatives, it is very easy to think that our job is to raise our families and to vote. And it requires a lot more than that. And it is not an easy thing to stand up to protesters, to stand up to bullies. And it requires quite a bit of courage. So for those people like Professor McAdams who are doing that, I'm not wearing a hat. My hat's off to you, and we're really grateful that you're in there fighting the good fight for us. Thank you. So as long as we're up here talking about free speech and political correctness, I think we should probably talk about the elephant in the room. Milo. You know, I had a pretty intense, I probably shouldn't say this in public, but I will anyway. I had a pretty intense argument in the bar on Friday night about Milo. And I think that's probably a division of views in this room from what I'm hearing. And I want to say again what I said before, that in free speech, the only attacks that are the only way to protect against vile speech is speech. You need to have arguments in bars with people, maybe not in bars. But you need to have arguments with people about what free speech is and what it isn't. And you need to have the right to say whatever you want to say, even if I'm offended or you're offended by it. I think that's absolutely true. But here's the question. When do you say that a particular kind of speech is or isn't representative of a movement? Scott, can I ask you to throw yourself on that hand grenade?
Well, I think you identified the issue pretty well there. You know, on the one hand, you have Milo's supporters who would say political correctness at this point has literally reached the fascist levels. I mean, that's quite clear. It's fascism against free speech. So that's really grave, and the Milo supporter would say, so if they're that outrageous, you have to be willing to outrage them, you have to be willing to show everybody this brutal narrative of oppression. And then on the other side would be, of course, the Milo's critics among conservatives, and they would say, look, free speech is precious, it's critical, it has to be defended, but at the same time, conservatives have to model the best speech, which is going to be civil and reasonable and the rest, and being outrageous ends up being counterproductive. Now, that's a really meaty argument for the conservative movement to have, and I think we should be proud. Unlike the left doesn't really allow honest, tough arguments like that, whereas you're doing that on this stage here, shows that we're open to listening to both sides, and that's not an easily settled argument.
One of the things I think is the most difficult, particularly in today's politics, is not to feel that you are compelled to be siloed into one particular place or another. I don't want to put you too much on the spot, Ambassador, but would you mind talking a little bit about the process of sort of straddling between silos in politics? I mean, you have constituents on both sides. You need to know that they need to know that you represent them. How do you walk that line between being sort of stereotypically reacting in a predictable way and being thoughtful with your constituents?
Well, I'll probably be a pretty defective politician because I've raised with a great belief in the Bill of Rights and our Constitution, as well as the Judeo-Christian.
That makes you a defective politician?
Because I know what I think, I know what I believe. I went to a lot of Jesuit schools. If people don't like it, they don't like it, okay? And I think we have to know what we stand for. And again, it's heartwarming to see the professor and to see these young people that are willing to stand up to this ridiculous stuff on these college campuses. And I'm a little nervous about some of my colleagues and what I'm hearing about their reaction to some of these protests. We need to stand up.
Do you feel that there are colleagues on the right who are afraid to stand up to them?
I think there are people that are, we were talking about it earlier, that are very nervous about the expression of views that are against the Republican agenda. They can't believe they didn't win. They can't believe that California didn't control everything that happens to all of our lives. And they're clinging like a barnacle to a piling to try to take us down, and we can't let it happen.
Well, I'm from Wisconsin, and hey, Wisconsin, yay, cheeseheads, go. And one of the things that I frequently discussed with my fellow cheeseheads is that if there were no electoral college, we would never see a presidential campaign. It wouldn't matter. And yet, interestingly enough, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about why Wisconsin turned red in the last election. You have to say that Hillary Clinton had to have something to do with it. She never even came. She never came to our state once. but I digress a little bit. So we have a few minutes left, just a few minutes left. I would like just to sort of take a moment and talk about Scott, Tom, Ambassador, Alex. What one thing do you want our audience to come away with? What thing do you hope that people can do or think about, or how to try to address this growing problem of bullying in our public sphere?
Well, I would say that you repeat something we've talked about so far, which is there is no substitute for heroes, for people who are willing to stand up, talk, and take hits. Yeah. And the thing about that is, think about this. The left's argument about political correctness is you're not a person. Your race or your sex or your sexual orientation or whatever it is, you're not you as a person. You're just one of them.
You're a thing.
A unit.
Yeah.
And when you act heroically, you're inherently destroying that narrative. It's like, no, I'm Scott Wolter. I'm not this, this, and this. Mm-hmm. And the more people who will do that, the more the meta-narrative of race, gender, class gets blown up, and that's the core of political correctness.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, voting, great. Voting is not enough. The professor needs air cover. Republicans need air cover. Voting is not enough. And as consumers, we need to start looking differently at the products we buy and why we buy them, right? Mm-hmm. So if the CEO of Starbucks is going to defy Trump by issuing a letter, which he did, and saying, I'm going to hire 10,000 refugees, I want to build a bridge rather than a wall with Mexico, and I like dreamers. If he's going to say that, then when you go to purchase a coffee, you need to say, how many of you put money into Hillary Clinton's coffers, right? You didn't do that because you didn't support her values. So why would you support a company whose values are directly against yours, and he will take that money and then drive it down your throat? Mm-hmm. So that's the activism, but we need the organization of that. Mm-hmm. So that's what we need to arm when you voice that opinion. A lot of people are exercising their wallets and their pocketbooks, but you don't talk about it. Wall Street doesn't know it. In fact, there was great news today about Starbucks, is that their brand, one way to measure their brand evaluation, it plummeted 66% since he defied Trump. Okay? But we need to take that message and drive it so the other CEOs know we're here, we're awake, and we're for freedom.
Mm-hmm. We've had a Lazarus moment here. Now, we have an opportunity to turn the ship around, and we all have a part in it, and these gentlemen have made clear they're different parts. And I think we need to speak up, and we need to speak up about the individualism and the individual rights and liberties that our Constitution gave us, against the collectivism and against the useless metaphors instead of real words, those kinds of things. We can do that. We can do that in our communities. We can do that in our church. I tried to get pastors to let me speak. Guess which ones let me speak? The evangelicals. The Catholic ones wouldn't do it. We have to be ready to stand up and speak about what we stand for. And we're all in this together.
Alex?
So I think that conservatives have two choices here. And, I'm the national leader of college Republicans. One of our principal aims is to win elections. And I know two things. I know, number one, that our generation is going to be deciding elections in the future, that this cycle, the next cycle, is probably one of the very last cycles that we can continue to depend on white working class male voters. The future of the electorate is young and it is diverse. The good news for us is that contrary to what you might hear or think, the majority of kids on a college campus or out there just generally are not liberals. These are kids that are moderate to conservative, a center-right representation of the electorate. So they are willing and open to our ideas. So I think we have two choices. I think one, we can sit around sort of mired in our own grief about sort of how, you know, terrible things are on college campuses, and they are. We can continue the outrage cycle where an outrageous incident happens and we all gather around that person and we all talk to ourselves and say, isn't that so outrageous? And we wait for the next outrageous incident to happen. Or we could believe enough in conservative principles that are timeless, principles that have lasted throughout the ages, that have opened more doors for more people, lifted more people out of poverty throughout time, and we could have the power of our belief to stand up and say, these are our principles, express them positively to a new generation that is willing and aching for them, and build a new narrative, get ourselves out of that outrage cycle. That's what I think we can do.
Excellent. Excellent.
I'd like to wrap up with one final thought, that every one of us, no matter what our faith, is an evangelist for our beliefs, for conservatism. And when you walk out and you stand up with courage, it's important to also stand up with compassion and with respect, and that who we are shows people what we are. I think that's very important, and what we believe. Thank you for your attention. Take care of those hangovers. Nice work. Thank you.
Thank you. You had